My name is Lionel Draper, and I have waited 30 years to say this out loud because I needed to be certain the sound wouldn't get here before the words did. In 1990, I was finishing my last winter as a ranger, knees shot, lungs full of dust, hands that still smelled like pine pitch and gun oil no matter how much I washed them. The paperwork said retirement. The truth was fear. I had started hearing things again, and I knew what that meant. There is a valley they don't mark anymore. Not because it's dangerous in the usual ways. No sheer cliffs, no unstable ground, no wildlife patterns worth a warning sign. They erased it because the valley doesn't wait for time. It hears what hasn't happened yet. And once you realize that, you never stop listening. The first time it happened to me was in late October 1972. Cold enough that breath stayed visible, quiet enough that sound carried too far. I was posted alone, driving an old Forest Service truck with a busted heater, following a paper map that had already been redrawn twice that year. Locals called the place Gray Echo Valley, though that name never made it into any official logbook. I stopped the truck when I heard footsteps behind me. They were deliberate, measured, ranger boots on shale. I remember thinking how strange it was that I hadn't heard a radio call first. Protocol mattered back then. Nobody moved without checking in. I turned, expecting to see my partner cresting the trail. Instead, the trail was empty. The footsteps continued anyway, 3 more crunches of gravel, closing distance, stopping exactly where I stood. I felt the pressure of proximity without a body to justify it. My hand went to the radio on my chest. Before I could speak, the radio crackled. "Copy that, Draper. You're clear to proceed." My own voice came out of the speaker. Same cadence, same breath hitch on the word proceed. It wasn't distorted or warped like a bad signal. It was clean, confident, already finished. I hadn't touched the transmit button. I logged it as interference, solar activity, faulty equipment. That's what the manuals said to do when reality didn't cooperate, but the valley kept correcting me. Over the next few months, I heard doors slam before I closed them, heard rifle bolts cycle before my hands moved. Once, I heard myself swear under my breath, then realized the sound had come 5 seconds early. 5 seconds doesn't sound like much until it happens again, and again, until you realize the valley isn't echoing the past. It's rehearsing the future. By 75, maps started disagreeing with each other. Trails shifted a few yards overnight. Compass needles hesitated at the valley's edge like they were deciding whether to lie. We'd pin notices to the ranger station board, unconfirmed acoustics. Possible atmospheric anomaly, harmless words to keep hikers out and superiors satisfied. Then Ranger Collins disappeared. We found his truck parked clean, keys still in the ignition, logbook open to a page that ended mid-sentence. What we heard first wasn't a cry for help. It was the sound of his body hitting the ravine floor. That noise came at us from deep inside the valley, bone on stone, final, unmistakable. It arrived 4 hours before we found him. The search party didn't want to go in after that. None of us said why. You don't tell another man you're afraid of hearing your own end before it happens. Command ordered us forward anyway. Law enforcement joined, clipboards, flashlights with yellowed lenses, analog radios chirping like nervous insects. As we moved deeper, the forest went quiet in a way that felt intentional. No wind, no birds, just us and the sounds. We heard our own voices calling out names we hadn't spoken yet. Heard safety lines snap before they were even tied. At one point, I heard a scream rip through the trees so violently I dropped to one knee. The scream came from my own throat, but my mouth was closed. That night the radios began answering questions before anyone asked them. Not garbled, not delayed, anticipatory, as if something in the valley was leaning forward, impatient, already bored with waiting for us to catch up. That was when I realized this wasn't an echo. It was a warning system, and it was learning us. I should have left then, we all should have. Instead, I kept writing reports, kept drawing maps that wouldn't stay true, kept pretending that if I followed procedure closely enough, time would forgive us for trespassing. It didn't. The valley was listening long before we arrived. And by the time we understood what it was saying, it already knew what we were going to do next. By the winter of 1978, the valley had a file of its own, thin, gray, and locked in a cabinet nobody labeled. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it ruined careers. Men transferred out early. One drank himself into a medical discharge. Another put in for a desk job and never spoke to anyone from the field again. When I asked why, he said, "I don't like hearing things that know my name." The cover story was geological acoustics, temperature inversions, a bowl-shaped landform that carried sound in strange ways. That explanation worked right up until the sounds started choosing what to carry. In '81, we ran a joint operation with county law enforcement. Missing hunters, two brothers who failed to check in after crossing what used to be Trail 9B, we set up a forward post just outside the valley's mouth. Canvas tents. A generator that coughed more than it ran. Radios checked and rechecked. Everything analog, everything tangible. We needed proof that something solid still obeyed cause and effect. At 600 hours, I logged the first anomaly. A gunshot echoed out of the valley. Single report, large caliber, close enough to feel in the ribs. We froze, hands went to holsters, someone shouted for status checks. The radios stayed silent. Then one by one, the radios answered. Unit 2 secure. Unit 3 holding. Unit 4 negative contact. All spoken in voices we recognized. All calm, all confident. The problem was simple and impossible at the same time. Those units hadn't checked in yet. Half the men hadn't even left camp. We rushed in anyway. That's what training does. It fills the space where fear should be. As we advanced, the valley began to speak in pieces, branches snapping before we stepped on them. Labored breathing drifting past us, warm and close, though every man around me was silent. Then I heard my father's voice. He'd been dead for 6 years. He called my name the way he used to when I was a kid, drawn out, patient, disappointed. It came from the tree line to my left, exactly where the map said there was nothing but rock. I didn't answer. None of us did. We kept moving because stopping felt worse. We found the brothers' campsite untouched. Coffee still in a thermos, barely cold. One sleeping bag unzipped from the inside. No blood, no drag marks. Just the sound of something heavy being pulled across gravel, slow, methodical, coming from further down the slope. That sound stopped when we stopped. Then it started again, closer. The radios went wild after that. Not static dialogue, arguments, pleas, orders none of us remembered giving. I heard myself screaming for help over Channel 3 while my real mouth tasted like copper and stayed shut. When the first deputy broke, it wasn't dramatic. He just sat down hard and covered his ears like a child. He kept whispering, "It already happened. It already happened." We pulled out at dusk with no bodies and no explanations. 2 days later, a black sedan arrived at the ranger station. No markings, no names offered. The men inside knew the valley without being told. They knew about the radios, the timing, the voices. They told us to stop documenting specifics. Future auditory displacement, one of them called it like he was naming a bug. He said it didn't matter why it happened, only that it stayed contained. New boundaries were drawn. The valley was scrubbed from public maps. Trail signs quietly removed. Reports rewritten. Collins officially fell during inclement conditions. The brothers wandered off trail. I signed every falsified log. The worst part wasn't the lies, it was the relief. The moment the paperwork changed, the sounds faded like the valley approved of being forgotten, like secrecy fed it. Years passed, I married, I transferred stations. I told myself the phenomenon was local, contained, dormant. Then in 1989, the sounds came back, miles away, thin but unmistakable. I heard my wife call for me from the kitchen before she opened her mouth. I heard a glass shatter that was still intact in my hand. That's when I understood the final truth we'd been avoiding. The valley didn't just echo the future. It spread it. Whatever learned us in that place didn't stay put. It listened, memorized, and waited for the right distance, the right silence, the right moment to speak again. By the time I filed my retirement papers, I could hear my own footsteps arriving a second early wherever I went. Just enough warning to know I was still on the path it expected. I never went back to the valley. I didn't have to. It had already come with me. I've learned to live inside the delay. That's what the doctors called it when I tried once to explain. Auditory stress, residual hallucination. They offered pills that dulled the edges but never touched the timing. Because this isn't about hearing things that aren't there. It's about hearing things that aren't there yet. By 1990, the gap had narrowed. What used to be seconds became heartbeats, a breath, the soft click of a light switch just before my fingers reached it. the sound of my own chair scraping the floor before I stood up. The world started to feel pre-recorded, like I was walking along a track laid down by something patient and invisible. I stopped using radios entirely, too much risk. The last time I keyed a mic, I heard my own voice begged me not to, not screamed, begged. That was worse. I pulled the battery out and threw it into a river that night. Still, sometimes I hear static where there shouldn't be any, in the walls, in the trees, in the space between one thought and the next. The final incident, the one that ended my career for good, happened in early spring. Snowmelt season. I was assigned a routine boundary check nowhere near the erased valley, different forest, different maps. I told myself that mattered. I heard the sound first. A body falling through branches. It came from uphill to my right, sharp and violent and unmistakably human. I dropped my pack and ran before protocol could stop me. When I reached the source, there was nothing. No broken limbs, no blood, no sign of impact. Just the echo of the fall, still hanging in the air like a held breath. 30 seconds later, a hiker stumbled out of the brush above me, slipped on wet rock, and fell exactly where I had been standing. If I hadn't moved, I wouldn't be telling you this. That was the moment I understood the valley's true cruelty. It doesn't predict the future to warn us. It does it to edit us, to shift outcomes, to see what changes. Every sound arrives early to see who listens and who doesn't. I filed my last report that evening. It was short, vague, safe. I didn't mention the sound. I didn't mention the man who nearly died in my place. I didn't mention that I recognized the rhythm of the fall because I'd heard it decades earlier, deep in a valley that officially never existed. When I retired, they gave me a plaque and a handshake and a pension I didn't feel I'd earned. No one asked why I flinched at quiet moments. No one asked why I always waited an extra second before opening a door. I still do that, because sometimes in the pause I hear something new. Not a sound I recognize, not my voice, not anyone I've known. Something else. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in intent, in the shape of actions before they happen. Footsteps that don't belong to me. Breathing that anticipates my fear. The soft, patient sound of something standing exactly where I'm about to turn my head. I believe the valley was a thinning. A place where time folded just enough for something on the other side to listen in. Not malicious, not kind, just curious. We were patterns to it, variables. And curiosity, once satisfied, doesn't end. It expands. That's why I'm telling you this now, not because I want forgiveness, not because I expect anyone to believe me, but because the sounds are getting further ahead. Minutes now, sometimes longer, I hear things I know I won't live long enough to do. And recently, I've started hearing sounds that don't belong to my life at all. Voices that are younger, equipment that isn't mine, boots on gravel that don't match my stride. If you're listening to this and you spend time in forests, especially places where maps don't quite agree, where sound carries too cleanly, too patiently, pay attention to what you hear before you act. If the woods answer you early, don't answer back. Because once something learns the shape of your future, it never stops rehearsing it. And somewhere out there, in a valley that no longer has a name, something is still listening, waiting to hear what you're going to do next.